It is a really old debate among writers. Where do our ideas come from? Things we see around us? Things we remember from the past? Is it an emotional issue that we want to explore, or an important principle we arrived at that we want to advocate for? Some writers seem to have a pretty good idea where their ideas come from, while others seem to have no clue.
It's the worst, is people will say, where do you get your ideas? I don't know where I get them.
Maybe Jungian Psychology can provide us with an answer here. Hello, I'm Chris, and for this video and the next, I want to use Jungian Psychology to explore the two different ways that our brains get inspired to write, and how the idea for our story actually manifests. We will first dig into people who get inspired by their long-term memory and explore the cognitive functions of introverted sensing and extroverted intuition, and how writers whose brain predominantly uses these functions settle on their story ideas. Next video will deal with the short-term memory and the cognitive functions of extroverted sensing and introverted intuition. In the last video I talked about performance, and I introduced the cognitive functions of introverted sensing, SI, and extroverted sensing, SE. If you haven't watched the last video, it's fine, because all you need to know for now is that introverted sensing is the long-term memory, as well as your ability to pay attention to your internal physical experience. By the end of these two videos, you'll have a good understanding of the roles SI and SE play for your memory. Let's first look at a couple of writers who turned out as SI users and hear what they have to say when they get asked about where their ideas come from. The writer Arkady Martine describes in pretty clear language what fuels the writing of introverted sensing users. In fact, she actually uses pretty much the language that I would be using.
I've always loved, as a reader, as a watcher of movies, as a storyteller, I love women in power, especially slightly morally ambiguous women in power. It's a thing I really enjoy experiencing as a consumer of media, and logically, it's a thing that I enjoy writing. I know what things should feel like. I know what they should look like, and I know what the experience of reading them should evoke.
As you can see, Arkady Martine focuses a lot on describing her internal physical reaction to what she is reading. Here is Rebecca Thorne describing how her story This Gilded Abyss is an amalgamation of those past experiences that she enjoyed a lot.
So I'm really big into gaming. I've done Mass Effect is my favorite game ever. And then I grew up on BioShock. And for anybody who doesn't know, BioShock is like a horror movie. It's like a horror game where you drop into this underwater city called Rapture, and then you're basically fighting zombies the entire time. And then Mass Effect is kind of similar, but it's in space. Like you have to fight these zombies in space. So I read this fan fiction like a decade ago about the two of the characters in Mass Effect that were trapped on a spaceship that was like being taken over by one of these like alien zombie races. And it was so good, and I loved it because it was so intense. Like they were trapped on this ship, they couldn't get out. They were like fighting for their lives every time they turned a corridor. They were like, finding these quiet moments together inside like the hallway and stuff. And it was just so good. And I've had that in my mind as something I wanted to do for a long time. It's going to be great for anybody who loved BioShock, anybody who loved Mass Effect, anybody who loved the TV show Arcane. It's got the characters in this book I basically based off of Caitlin and Vi.
What we just heard from both Arkady Martine and Rebecca Thorne is how their own memories of enjoyable experiences guide them as they try to decide what to write. And in their case, it leads to them writing an amalgamation of their favorite past experiences. That is just one example of what SI inspiration can look like. We have enjoyed so many things in media, in shows, in books, so now we know what we enjoy. So we want to keep enjoying it. I myself am writing a story right now, which is an amalgamation of Doctor Who, Tomb Raider, Arcane, and She-Ra of 2017, because I spent a lot of time in the past enjoying these games and shows. If we listen to Stephen King talk about his inspiration, we might be inclined to believe that it is not SI inspiration, because he always gets his ideas from his environment and from things he sees, not necessarily from his past or from things he has enjoyed in the past. However, if you listen to any of King's longer talks, you will hear that King again and again mentions that the inspiration comes from ideas that scare him, and that he wants to explore those ideas because they scare him. Which means he is very aware of his internal physical experience, and it is, in fact, the driving force of his inspiration. Writers can find very interesting ways of getting inspired, and it isn't always what I present here, but I promise that we will tackle every possible form of inspiration and every other behavior at some point, and we will be able to explain them all. So now let's look at other forms of inspiration that might look like introverted sensing or extroverted sensing inspiration, but aren't. First of all, emotional problems. If your ideas come from emotional problems you want to explore, then that's neither SI nor SE inspiration. Secondly, investment. People often build principles and get really invested in certain messages or topics or themes, which they may choose to advocate for. A lot of times they build their stories around those principles, and this is also neither SI inspiration nor SE inspiration. Nostalgia. Wanting to relive past events or wanting to explore your personal history is something that I've seen with both introverted sensing and extroverted sensing users. That is also not SI inspiration. Alright, it's time again for some Jungian psychology. But before that, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and maybe give me a comment. It's really gonna help me with the algorithm. Alright, now I want to look at how introverted sensing writers actually pick an idea. And for that we have to introduce the cognitive function that is attached to introverted sensing, extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition is all about predicting future outcomes and extrapolating the present. It is imagination that explores all sorts of future scenarios and alternative worlds simply by adapting memories. Yes, extroverted intuition is strongly dependent on introverted sensing. So, in order to properly understand NE, we have to look at SI a little more. SI, as mentioned, is the long-term memory. This gives SI an interesting advantage over SE. SI remembers points in time and is able to connect these points with other points in time. This allows an SI user to establish patterns of cause and effect. They witness a person making a decision in 1990 something, and then they remember the outcome of that decision 6 years later. They also remember additional cases like this, that have started perhaps 2 years later and that had the same outcome perhaps 10 years later. Or perhaps they have heard a story of someone else which also fits into this pattern. And the more often they observe a pattern, the more confident they are that if they observe this pattern in the present, they will be able to predict its outcome. They even remember circumstances that might factor in. Person A tried this, but they had no money, so they failed. Person B tried the same thing in the same way, but they had money, so they succeeded. A person observes and remembers with introverted sensing. Because they remember, they can make connections to new observances. This goes on for all their lives, so they become better and better at understanding what will happen when they observe certain patterns of behavior. Which means they can then give advice to people or warn people about the path that they are currently on, because they might lack the experience to see these outcomes for themselves. The introverted sensing, extroverted intuition user observes a behavior or circumstance in the present, and their brain immediately forms the connection to all the times that they have observed this before and looks for patterns that are attached to it and then extrapolates the future. In the past, this happened, which always led to this outcome. Now it is happening again, which means this will happen next. The quote, "History is a teacher," directly refers to SINE. We have a long and detailed history of wars and political miscalculations, and so on. But of course, due to constantly changing circumstances, no one situation is quite like the other, which is why no NE prediction is 100% certain. Now let's look at writing again. NE imagines scenes and scenarios and stories based on past experiences. The role of SI is to see if these scenarios lead to enjoyment for the writer. So in other words, NE explores all sorts of different scenarios and SI tastes them, looking for a sense of enjoyment. It's like you're sitting back and you're daydreaming, and then at some point one of these daydreams is going to be like exactly to your liking. Your SI palette, which is very refined from years and decades of consuming a certain media that you really enjoy, is going to be able to tell you exactly which daydream you enjoy the most. You are basically writing for yourself. This is exactly what Arkady Martine has said in her clip. She knows exactly what feeling this is going to evoke because she has experienced it herself so many times. So now she's looking for a story or a scene or an image that will give her the same feeling, the same sense of enjoyment. This can also take a different form where you imagine something that could give you a very good sense of enjoyment, but you don't really know yet because you have to write it first, you have to create it first in order to be able to judge it. Here is Trey Parker describing this version of the introverted sensing palette.
I still can't write a scene and then be like, oh, that's going to be good. Or like, let's work on the scene on this. I have to see it. And the quicker I can see it, animatic's okay, kind of helps, but you still don't know. Then you see it, but we can see it animated, and I can go, oh, you know what? Change that to Cartman, have him do this, go over here, have a car come in and do that.
Both these forms are introverted sensing, extroverted intuition. Because in both cases, you judge what you see or what you imagine based on the internal physical reaction it gives you. This leads me to one basic piece of advice that I will always give every SINE user that I ever meet. You need life experience. Your ability to extrapolate the future and imagine awesome stories is entirely dependent on your life experience. You need to read more books, not just fiction but non-fiction as well, because non-fiction teaches you about the world and human nature, and it will give you the ability to create realistic worlds and characters. You need to meet real people in order to understand people. If you only ever read fiction books, then you are like an AI that is fueled by AI, that copies AI. A lot of times the simple truth is that your book might be bad because you are too young and inexperienced, in which case, no harm done. All you gotta do is just get out there and live your life and get new experiences. Or you stayed inside your comfort zone for far too long, in which case, again, just get out there and have some experiences. Do the same thing that Stephen King does and write about what scares you. Expose yourself to things that scare you or things that make you uncomfortable. My sister is an introverted sensing user, and before she was 20 years old, she jumped out of an airplane with a parachute, obviously. On that note, we're gonna end this video here. I hope you had fun. I hope you enjoyed it. Next video, we are going to talk about extroverted sensing and introverted intuition and how writers who use these cognitive functions get inspired and what the introverted intuition vision looks like. I hope I'll see you then.